Beyond the Supernatural, by Dr. Ahmed Tawfiq. Let me introduce myself. Dr. Rafat Ismail, former professor of hematology at S University and several universities across Europe and America. I'm in my 70s, unmarried, as my tumultuous life never gave me the chance to be like others. I have witnessed many things. I have opened Count Dracula's coffin, fought a werewolf in Romania, searched for the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, encountered the terrifying Yeti in Tibet, answered the call of the Nadar in the dark cornfields, and met the zombies in Jamaica. I will recount all these experiences in detail in this series, but once again, I must warn those with weak hearts and sensitive souls to refrain from reading, thereby saving themselves hours of anxiety, fear, and dread of the dark. Today I will tell you my story with the vampire. At that time, I was a young man of 35, completely unaware of the supernatural world. I believed that science had explained everything. Of course, I was naive. I travelled to Britain to attend a hematology conference featuring elite scholars from all over the world. However, as is often the case, the lectures were not as captivating as one might hope. That day, I endured 4 of the dullest hours of my life, listening to endless talk about leukemia and thalassemia. The doctors in the audience had succumbed to that particular brand of boredom and intellectual stagnation that I like to call conference stupor. They had all lost feeling in their backs and limbs, their bodies seemingly fused to the chairs. Some passed the time by whispering to each other, covering their mouths like school children. Thank you. For a moment, these poor souls could not believe their ears. But the speaker had indeed concluded his lengthy lecture, and soon relieved sighs of gratitude filled the hall, followed by polite applause. The speaker was a distinguished elderly man named Richard Cummings. I had met him several times in Egypt and had been greatly impressed by him. He was a proud, imposing, and passionate man, deeply enamoured with history and art, especially the history of the pharaohs, which was our common ground. After the lecture, I approached him. He greeted me warmly, his face lighting up with joy. He even shook my hand, a rare gesture for an Englishman, before asking for my thoughts on his presentation. I lied politely, telling him it was fascinating. He then invited me to his countryside home in Yorkshire, claiming that I was a civilized man with a deep dedication to science. Thus, following strict English etiquette, I found myself stepping into the entrance of his beautiful English garden precisely at 7 in the evening. The moon cast a soft, gentle glow over the ivy vines draping the sloped roof of his house. In the garden, unfamiliar fragrances filled the air from flowers whose names I did not know. Inside, the house was simple yet elegant, a home of a devout Catholic family. The living room was adorned with a large collection of antique crosses and a grand painting of the Last Supper. His wife, a middle-aged woman, was polite and graceful, while his daughter Catherine, though a teenager, displayed remarkable maturity beyond her years. I realized just how religious they were when they recited grace before dinner. It made me feel ashamed for forgetting to say Bismillah before eating. I murmured, "In the name of Allah," from start to finish, and proceeded to fill my stomach with the visually appealing yet horrendously tasting dishes for which English cuisine was infamous across Europe. After dinner, in the cosy living room, Dr. Ra, Richard sat by the fireplace, smoking his pipe and sipping his coffee with sheer enjoyment. At that moment, life seemed as perfect as it could ever be. Dr. Richard said, "How does it feel to be a descendant of the pharaohs, those geniuses? I have studied their civilization and the immense contributions they made to the modern world. I feel ashamed that I have never visited Luxor, despite being so close to it. I truly believe that this generation will add nothing remarkable to the legacy of civilization. All we do now is consume what others have built. Sometimes I think the era of discovery has ended, and the era of development has begun." I smiled, unsure how to respond, and muttered, "Dr. Richard said that is true. Every legend has some basis in reality, and this is where the role of a scientist begins, not to merely contemplate it, but to search for its true origins. Take the legend of Count Dracula, for example. There are numerous historical clues, fascinating ones indeed. Blood, that mysterious red fluid, is the symbol of both life and death. It was discovered in ancient Indian rituals, the fanged mummies of China. The blood-drinking ceremonies in Mayan temples, where they consumed a mixture of blood, vinegar, and spices, and the turtle blood rituals among Native Americans. Consider how the vampire myth was an accepted belief during the Middle Ages, with various stories about expelling vampires as if they were actual creatures. And here, if we allow ourselves some intellectual flexibility, we might conclude that at some point in time, in some place, there truly existed nightmare beings that lived on blood, just like Dracula. Oh, the voice belonged to Catherine. She had just entered the room, overhearing the last sentence. Without a word, she quickly ascended to her room. Dr. Richard sighed and said, "That's for the best. Some things should not be discussed in front of women." Catherine then excused herself for the night. Dr. Richard put out his pipe and the room was engulfed in darkness, except for the soft, flickering glow of the fireplace. Then in a dramatic tone he muttered, "What terrifying conversations these are." He added, "Such a fitting atmosphere for the journey that awaits us tomorrow." A chill ran down my spine. The sight of the flames dancing in the fireplace evoked both warmth and fear within me. After this long evening, I returned to my hotel, my mind swirling with thoughts about this intriguing subject. "Doctor." Richard suddenly stopped in front of one of the paintings hanging on the wall, gazing at it intently. Then, in a hushed voice, he whispered, "I have spent long years researching this, alongside a fellow historian, and today I can finally say that we have proven, with material evidence, the existence of Count Dracula. The story, as everyone knows it, is about the Count who lived in Transylvania during the 14th century. He was evil in every sense of the word, but he was not one of the undead. However, an enthusiastic writer gave him the name Dracula, meaning the devil, and Bram Stoker immortalized him in his famous novel, which still sends shivers down people's spines to this day. Then came international cinema, with stars like Vincent Price and Lon Chaney completing the picture. And today I say with absolute certainty that Dracula truly existed, exactly as the stories have described him, without any exaggeration. To the Count's servant I said eagerly, "But we are men of science, and we know that what cannot be seen, heard, smelled, or comprehended simply does not exist." Dr. Richard smiled confidently, then walked to the corner of the room, opened a drawer, and took out a thick envelope filled with documents. He handed it to me and said, "Read these papers before you speak of science." Before I could respond, Mrs. Cummings entered with a cheerful expression. I thanked her for the dinner, trying to sound as refined as possible, and then we started a conversation about the weather. I also expressed my admiration for their home, especially the Last Supper painting hanging on the wall. She began explaining the story behind the painting and the expressions on the faces of those seated around the table. Then she suddenly asked me, "Do you know why Westerners consider spilling salt on the table a bad omen?" I shook my head, admitting my ignorance. She said, "Because in the painting the traitor has spilled salt in front of him. Look at his face. It bears all the sins of mankind, consumed by an evil from which he finds no escape." I was fully immersed in the discussion about the painting, but my mind was preoccupied with something else. The envelope in my hands and the distance between me and my warm bed where I could read it. When I returned to the hotel, I lay down on the bed and examined the envelope Dr. Richard had given me. It was filled with old papers and photographs. One photo was of a strange ancient castle. Another showed a closed marble coffin. There was also a picture of something I couldn't quite understand, and another of a tall, bearded man's face painted in an old oil portrait. The fragile, yellowed paper contained a hand-drawn map in black ink of an unknown castle, riddled with underground tunnels marked with strange names I couldn't even decipher. Too many mysteries. Finally, I found a page written in English in Dr. Richard's handwriting. We spent months exploring the underground tunnels of Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania, a place authorities have prohibited tourists from visiting due to the risk of collapse. At last, we discovered the attached map, which led us to the family tombs of the Count in an ancient crypt, filled with dust and bats. We opened the coffins one by one until we found the mummy of the Count himself. Resting on his chest was an ivory box, inside which we discovered an old letter written by his servant for future generations. I write this letter for those who will come after me to warn them of a terrible danger. Evil has chosen this cursed land as its dwelling. Dracula was the first vampire born in this land. Among the peasants, the Count was infamous for his cruelty and tyranny, using an army of mercenaries to enforce his rule, earning him the title the Demonic One, or Dracula. Each evening, the Count began drinking a horrific mixture of pig's blood, wine, and spices, claiming it restored his youth. He delved into the study of dark magic, becoming more reclusive and strange. His features changed, his face grew elongated, and his voice took on the eerie howl of a wolf under the moonlight. He would leave the castle at night and return at dawn, isolating himself for hours in the castle's basement. He had even stopped eating food entirely. When I searched through books of magic, I found an explanation for his condition. That mixture he drank was leading him toward immortality in the most horrifying way. It transformed those who became addicted to it into human-like bats that fed on human blood at night, slept in coffins during the day, and perished when exposed to sunlight. I had to verify this myself. The next morning, I gathered my courage and descended into the castle's cellar. The coffins of his ancestors were stacked there, the stench of decay filling the air, while rats scurried about freely. I approached a marble coffin and found what I was searching for. The Count lay motionless, his face as pale as the dead, with fresh drops of blood still clinging to his lips. His eyes were open, staring blankly into the void. I stepped closer, summoning my courage. Slowly I pried open his mouth and saw 2 rows of sharp fangs, like those of a predator. A wave of terror paralyzed my mind. I ran in a frenzy, thinking only of escape. I even forgot to close the coffin. So, the Count had truly become a vampire, a danger to himself and everyone around him. The villagers had been right to make the sign of the cross whenever they passed the castle. This was the secret behind the old beggar's corpse found near the castle, his lifeless body lying on the ground, with 2 red puncture marks on his neck. This was why the Count had removed the white curtains and discarded all religious icons. This was the source of the terrifying howls that echoed through the castle on moonlit nights. I returned to my books of magic, desperately searching for a way to end this nightmare. He had not yet drained my blood. Perhaps he needed something else. I discovered that vampires could be killed, for they perished when exposed to religious symbols. Light, the color white, silver, and holy scriptures all could destroy them. However, the most effective method was to drive a wooden stake through their heart, followed by the recitation of the funeral prayer. The books warned that a vampire rises once every 100 years to spread terror, only to be slain by someone untouched by evil. And at that moment, I felt something strange in the room. Slowly, I lifted my head. There, standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, was the Count. He smiled, a sickly, yellow smile that sent chills down my spine. Night had fallen without me realizing it. When he awoke and saw his coffin left uncovered, he knew that I had discovered his secret. I stared at him in horror. His face no longer resembled the one I once knew. His fangs gleamed, his skin was pale and wrinkled, and the stench of sulphur emanated from him, exactly as described in the books of dark magic. He moved before the mirror, yet he cast no reflection. Even the candlelight in the room left no shadow of him on the wall. I screamed in terror, "My God, save me!" The Count flinched and stepped back for a moment. Seizing the opportunity, I dashed toward the door faster than I had ever run before. I rushed into my room, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. In the final moment before I lost consciousness, I saw the door handle twitch, but the lock held firm. Yes, the Count had become an heir to evil on this earth. He was afflicted, and he knew it. I had made up my mind. I would end his suffering. I will kill him today. The books of magic say that he will perish at the hands of a man untainted by evil, and I am that man. I am the judge, the prosecutor, and the executioner in this trial. I will descend into his chamber, carrying a silver dagger, garlic, and, most importantly, my faith. And if I meet my demise, let whoever finds this letter learn what I have learned and be prepared for the Count's return every 100 years until one among us stands righteous and defeats him. The Count's servant. Year 1590. At the end of the letter, I found a brief note in Dr. Richard's handwriting. He stated that they had discovered the Count's mummy, with this warning resting on his chest. This meant that the servant had succeeded in his mission. The journal ended there. I switched off the lamp and rested my eyes in the darkness. So these myths are what occupy the mind of this great scholar. All this nonsense they spread in horror films about Indians, Spartans, and the mummies of China, mere superstition. I tried to amuse myself by imagining the form of evil in the world. A ghoul with red eyes, an octopus with 6 arms. I couldn't picture it. But for some reason I couldn't explain, the image of Judas's face in Da Vinci's painting wouldn't leave my mind. That miserable expression, the look of a sinner who knows only how to sin. I didn't know how, nor when, but I drifted into a deep slumber.
The mummy. The next day, after the conference's agenda had concluded, I met Dr. Richard at the institution's cafeteria. He was sipping his coffee and smoking. I greeted him, and it seemed to me that the previous night had been nothing more than something trivial, distant. Dr. Richard stirred the cream on the surface of his cup, then asked me, "Did you read the papers?" "Yes. And what do you think?" I was honest about my opinion on the whole matter. His eyes flashed with anger as he placed his cup back onto the saucer. "Superstitions? You think that I, along with one of the greatest scientists in European history, fell victim to a crude hoax staged by some prankster? Fine. Then that prankster must have gone to unimaginable lengths, preparing all these papers, arranging the mummy, and waiting for years until a fool like me happened to search that crypt and find these things. What a joke." There was nothing to prove my opinion, but nothing to disprove it either. He shook his head in irritation, then regained his inherited composure and said, "I want you to come tonight. There's something new I want you to see. Same time." Once again, at dinner, I sat across from Judas's sinful gaze. On the other side of the table sat Professor Max Lavarsky, who, as you already know, was Jewish. He never stopped talking about the suffering he endured in Nazi concentration camps. Why are scientists so unbearably dull? After dinner, Dr. Richard turned to me and said, "What I am about to show you now is the culmination of years of research, mine and Professor Lavarsky's. I do not demand that you believe, but I do demand, rightfully so, that you respect everything you are about to see. Furthermore, what you will witness must remain a secret." He pronounced the last words in a chilling tone, deliberately emphasizing the word must. A sense of dread crept into me, and I said, "I promise you that." I rose with them and followed them down into the cellar, the basement of that elegant English house, filled with the scent of aged wine, dampness, and something else, something I could not quite bring myself to like. Dr. Richard pulled back the burlap covering a locked chest in one of the corners. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he opened it and exclaimed, "Gentlemen, behold, the mummy of Count Dracula!" To be fair, I felt neither fear nor curiosity, nothing at all, really. I simply maintained the composed expression of a scientist who does not marvel at things, but merely takes an interest in them. It was an ordinary mummy, bearing all the usual traits and flaws of any other mummy: decayed skin, scattered tufts of hair, a disfigured nose. But one thing was different: the teeth. Why did this thing's jaw have those? The sharp fangs, like those of a wolf. Dr. Cummings smirked, his expression unreadable, then whispered, "What do you think?" I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to Lavarsky and asked, "How did you even manage to bring it here?" "We succeeded in smuggling it through complex means, passing it off as a shipment of excavation tools. The authorities in Transylvania don't even know of its existence here, which means they haven't been looking for it at all." Richard Cummings struck a match and held it close to the mummy. Suddenly, the flame flickered and died out. He gasped. "Do you see? There's an inert gas seeping from the mummy." I struggled to accept any of this, but it was real. Right before my eyes stood undeniable proof of the fallibility of scientific assumptions, of the existence of magic, of the possibility that all legends might actually be true. I turned to Dr. Richard. "But why waste so much time and effort on this?" "Truth," he said simply. Then he continued, "The truth that will grant science an unprecedented flexibility, one that will allow it to embrace myths and the beliefs of primitive cultures, igniting a revolution the world has never seen before. We now stand before undeniable proof of the existence of magic." Minutes later, we ascended to the living room and gathered around a collection of old documents. I frowned. "I still don't understand. Why show this to me in particular? You are a Muslim, Dr. Rifat." "Yes, and I am Catholic. Dr. Lavarsky is Jewish. That means the witnesses to this miracle will represent 3 religions." "What miracle?" "The return of Dracula. Rituals." Dr. Richard reached for the papers, opened one and began to read. The documents state that the vampire returns to the world every 100 years to spread corruption and evil, only to be slain by someone who remains untainted. At this point, Dr. Lovarsky, stroking his beard, said, "We have historical evidence of creatures with vampire-like traits appearing, and bodies with punctured necks being discovered in the years 1759 and 1859, specifically on moonlit nights when Jupiter aligns with Mars. It seems that he was slain each time, only to return to the mummified form we now see." "Did he return on his own?" Dr. Lovarsky replied, "Neither, with the aid of some scoundrels who perform the necessary rituals to resurrect him. And now I begin to understand. We are in the year 1959. This is the long-awaited year." Dr. Max Lovarsky unfolded a yellowed paper and began reading. "The first ritual requires that it be performed by individuals whose wickedness knows no bounds. That means us." Dr. Richard said, "We are mere slaves to scientific curiosity, willing to do anything in pursuit of the truth. Science is what we live for." "The second ritual is the century condition. It must be 100 years since the Count's demise. The third ritual is the moon condition. The full moon must rise and Jupiter must align with Mars. The second and third conditions will be fulfilled in a week, on Wednesday night. The fourth ritual is the bat condition. A mummified bat must be placed on the corpse's chest. That won't be difficult. The fifth ritual is the blood condition. A bucket of blood must be placed beside the mummy. Human blood? The text does not specify. At that moment, something struck me. My eyes gleamed with pride, like a child who had just won a game of tag, and I exclaimed, "Wait a moment. History tells us that every 100 years some scoundrels would find the coffin and perform the same rituals. So how is it that the coffin has remained in the same place, and the message has stayed where the servant left it 5 centuries ago?" Dr. Richard's face turned red for a moment, then he whispered in surrender. "I really hadn't thought of that." Dr. Lovarsky said, "Perhaps whoever kills the Count each time chooses to leave the message in place for future generations. And why would the one who kills the Count make sure to return his body to the coffin each time? Why not bury it somewhere? Why not tear it apart or burn it? I never knew vampire hunters were this organized." Silence fell for a moment, and I realized, proudly, that both men hated me madly. But this was science, and they knew it better than I did. After some thought, Dr. Richard said, "All right, Dr. Riffart, we are determined to go through with the experiment, and there's only a week left. If you refuse, at least say so now, so I can find a scientist I trust from the Muslim community in England. Time is short, as you can see." To myself, I was naive, as I told you. Who was I to refuse something like this? Wednesday night was bound to be thrilling by all measures. That's what I thought. "Then let's begin. Time is short, as you said." There was nothing. I was so confident that I had already begun preparing the condolences I would offer them when the sun rose on Thursday and the mummy remained just that, a mummy. What a moment it would be. A moment when each of them would realize they had wasted their lives chasing a delusion. What a pity. It was all so clear in my mind. This was just a mummy, its teeth sharpened by someone to look like fangs, and it would stay that way. I saw no other possibility. In the morning, Jonathan, the grocer's boy, arrived with a small bundle that turned out to be a dead bat he had caught from the abandoned church next door. He took £2 and nearly flew away with joy. Dr. Richard and I sat in the garden, embalming the bat with formalin. Suppose we couldn't control Dracula when he rose, what then? Dr. Lovarsky said, "If he rises." He was terrifying in ancient times, the era of candelabras, horse-drawn carriages and countesses. But today he will return to an age of nuclear fission and electricity. He will be nothing more than an amusing test subject. Dr. Richard added, "We'll transport him to a dark lab in Glasgow, restrain him there and study everything, his blood composition, his tissues, his blood pressure, his temperature, and if he dies, we'll dissect him. Maybe one day, we'll hold a press conference or publish his memoirs in a book titled I Lived in a Coffin, a guaranteed bestseller." There was nothing. I was so sure of myself that I had already begun preparing the condolences I would offer them when the sun rose on Thursday, and the mummy remained just that, a mummy. What a moment. A moment when both of them would realize they had wasted their lives chasing an illusion. What a pity. It was all perfectly clear in my mind. This was just a mummy, its teeth filed down by someone to resemble fangs, and it would stay that way. I saw no other possibility. In the morning, Jonathan, the grocer's boy, arrived with a small bundle, which turned out to be a dead bat he had caught from the abandoned church next door. He took £2 and nearly flew away with joy. Dr. Richard and I sat in the garden, embalming the bat with formalin. Suppose we couldn't control Dracula when he rose. What then? Dr. Lavarsky said, if he rises, he was terrifying in ancient times, the era of candelabras, horse-drawn carriages, and countesses. But today he will return to an age of nuclear fission and electricity. He will be nothing more than an amusing test subject. Dr. Richard added, we'll transport him to a dark lab in Glasgow, restrain him there and study everything, his blood composition, his tissues, his blood pressure, his temperature, and if he dies, we'll dissect him. Maybe one day we'll hold a press conference or publish his memoirs in a book titled I Lived in a Coffin, a guaranteed bestseller. I said, this creature is incredibly lucky, but I wish I could return to life after 100 years just to see how politics, science, society and people have changed by then. A stench, unbearable and foul, spread through the place from the bat's rotten insides as we continued our work begrudgingly. Damn it. Now I understand why a vampire is only resurrected every 100 years. 3 scientists working patiently to prove an illusion.
Something. I sat in my cosy room, the one Dr. Richard had given me in his beautiful countryside house. I had left the hotel 3 days ago, but for some reason I had left my luggage there. I didn't know why. A mysterious feeling deep inside made me leave a part of myself outside the walls of this house. I lit a cigarette and started thinking what had drawn me into this story. It was that insane fascination with the unknown. That sharp thrill hidden in my grandmother's tales of the ghoul and the wailing spirit. And I wondered, what do these creatures look like? And why did folklore always portray them as female? Then I grew up and started going to the cinema. I watched Lon Chaney, the Man of 1,000 Faces, and Vincent Price playing the role of the enigmatic, bloodthirsty Count. Dracula had always fascinated me, perplexed me, and terrified me. And today, here I am, on the verge of discovering the truth behind this nightmare. Believe it or not, the mummy of this very Count lies in the basement of the house I'm in right now. And its awakening is set for no more than 3 days from now. What would my childhood friends in Mansoura say if they knew where I was now? Everything is ready. The bucket of pig's blood, the stuffed bat, and the company of 2 moody scientists who care only about science, regardless of its disastrous consequences. I turned on the bedside lamp and found a stack of books beside the bed. On top of them was Bram Stoker's famous novel, Dracula. Dr. Richard must have deliberately placed it there to immerse me in the atmosphere. I cursed under my breath, then opened the novel, letting its events sweep me away. What a brilliantly terrifying and disturbingly imaginative mind. I envied its author. I had reached the part where the Count enters his unsuspecting guest's room, Jonathan Harker, the solicitor, while he is shaving. At that moment, Harker wonders, why can't I see this man in the mirror? Then the Count's eyes fixate on a small cut on Harker's neck, caused by the razor. I had just reached that part when a knock on the door startled me. I jolted back to reality, got up and opened it. It was Dr. Richard. Did you sleep? Obviously not. He glanced at the novel lying on my bed and chuckled. So, you're preparing for our guest? Our guest? I muttered in irritation. Damn this novel. And what have you learned from it? I learned never to shave in front of Dracula to avoid cutting myself, because then... And what else? I learned never to trust people who don't have a reflection in the mirror. Dr. Richard burst into laughter. He was wearing a robe over a shirt and tie, looking strikingly elegant and handsome. Then he lit a cigarette, but unlike his usual habit, he didn't offer me one. He let his gaze wander around the room. Why don't you place some Quranic verses here and there? I pointed to the nightstand beside the bed, where a small Quran lay, the one my late mother had given me before my first trip abroad. Here it is, but for reading, not for protection from your vampire. He nodded in approval and sluggishly got up, heading toward the door. As he walked past the ornate mirror hanging on the wall, no, I must be imagining things. Was the mirror unpolished? Was the lighting too dim? Or did this man truly cast no reflection in the mirror? He turned to me with keen interest and asked, "Why do you look so terrified?" Should I confront him? No. Nothing, just the effect of your novel, nothing more. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Rafat, there's something important. What is it? Something I want to do, but I don't want Dr. Lavarsky to know about it. Will you promise me?" "I promise." "Then meet me in the basement in 10 minutes. He flicked his cigarette away and left leisurely. As soon as he was gone, I locked the door and rushed to the mirror. My reflection was there, clear as ever. But light plays many tricks. A perfectly angled refraction can turn water into a mirror, so why couldn't a mirror, under a certain angle and lighting, become a non-reflective surface? And even if the mirror didn't reflect his image, what did that mean? I didn't believe in ghosts. And even if I followed the logic of superstition, nothing had followed that eerie moment. No ominous consequences, no supernatural phenomena. Why did Dr. Seth Cummings want to meet me in the basement? It was certainly not to play cards or show me his stamp collection, and definitely not to suck my blood, because I refused to believe in such nonsense. What did he want from Dracula's mummy? What was it that he didn't want Dr. Lavarsky to know? Either way, 10 minutes had passed. I put on my robe and stepped out of my room, heading toward the basement. The dimly lit hallway, the remnants of dinner still on the table. Mrs. Cummings hadn't cleared them yet. Dr. Richard's door creaked open slowly. Yes. I noticed he was speaking loudly. Lowering my voice to a whisper, almost a hiss, I said, "Now let's go." "Go where?" "The basement." "The basement? Are you out of your mind?" What was happening? What was this lunatic talking about? But his face was serious, stern. There was no trace of humour in his expression. My words crashed against a cold, solid barrier and crumbled at my feet. "Didn't you ask me to?" "One moment. I asked you to do what?" "To go down to the basement. 10 minutes ago, in my room." At this point, I should probably summarise the conversation. You've likely already grasped its essence. He swore, confirmed, and insisted that he had never come to my room. Meanwhile, I was absolutely certain he had been there, for a reason known only to God. A tedious, futile exchange, like a conversation between the deaf, leaving us both convinced that the other was either lying or insane. Then he narrowed his eyes and said cryptically, "You know, Dr. Rifat, it seems that we are both right." The answer was clear. Someone had tried to lure me to the basement, someone who had taken his form. Are we really going back to this nonsense? Tell me, didn't you notice anything unusual about your visitor? I thought for a moment before replying indifferently. Nothing. Except that he didn't cast a reflection in the mirror. More riddles. "Would you like a slice of ham, Dr. Rifat?" Mrs. Cummings asked me sweetly as we sat around the breakfast table. I shook my head, declining. She poured more coffee into my cup, commenting that I looked exhausted. "It was a dreadful night, madam. Someone visited me and—" But here Dr. Richard shot me a sharp, silencing glare, cutting my words short. Strange. In the morning sunlight, last night's events seemed foggy, ridiculous even. It was just a prank, nothing more. Or at worst, a bizarre hallucination brought on by reading Bram Stoker's ghastly tale. After breakfast, we entered Dr. Richard's office and gathered around him. He lit a cigarette, then smiled and said, "Last night, Dr. Rifat had a rather interesting visitor." He recounted the story to Dr. Lavarsky, who listened intently, his sharp eyes studying me like a hawk. When Richard finished, silence hung in the air. Then, after a few moments, Dr. Lavarsky spoke in a measured, judicial tone. "I believe everything now depends on Dr. Rifat." I asked, perplexed, "What do you mean?" He replied with unsettling confidence, "Dr. Richard's story is indisputable, but yours is open to discussion." My blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting that I'm lying?" "Are you suggesting that I'm lying?" "No, my friend. I'm saying that you're mistaken." I shook my head. The truth was I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Everything I had seen felt tangible, disturbingly real. But I had never hallucinated before. Perhaps all hallucinations feel just as convincing. Then suddenly I remembered something. What a fool I had been. "Come with me to my room." In my room the bed remained untouched. I never bothered making it in the morning. Now you see what I mean. I pointed at Bram Stoker's novel, still open, and at the small Quran on the nightstand, both of which had been topics in my conversation with last night's visitor. Dr. Richard said, "That doesn't prove anything. It's natural for a hallucination to incorporate real elements from your surroundings." "And what about this?" I directed their attention to the undeniable evidence of my sanity. There, on the linoleum floor, was a burnt cigarette butt, the same type smoked exclusively by Dr. Richard. Dr. Lavarsky remarked, "A small thing, young man. Perhaps Dr. Richard simply offered you one of his cigarettes. He has never offered me a cigarette in his life." Richard sighed impatiently. "Listen, my friend, life is complicated enough without adding to it. Why are you making a fuss over a cigarette butt?" I snapped in frustration. "I'm telling you, someone or something entered my room last night and tried to lure me to the basement, and this cigarette butt is the proof." Then, turning to Richard in desperation, I pleaded, "Dr. Richard, why don't you just admit you were playing a joke and put an end to this nonsense?" He glared at me. "Mind your manners, young man, I do not lie. But the only scientific explanation is that you're lying." Words flared like sparks, and I suspect that if things had escalated further, I might have hit him, or he might have thrown me out, if not for— "I will not allow this," he snapped, "and I demand that you show more respect to a man old enough to be your father." Dr. Lavarsky, with his stout frame, stepped between us, diffusing the tension. "Gentlemen, please, we've forgotten something." We fell silent, waiting to hear what this Jewish doctor had to say. What was Dr. Rifat supposed to do in the basement? I don't know. Neither do I. "Then let's go down to the basement and take a look." We descended into the basement. The coffin, the dull booklet, the musty odour, nothing new or noteworthy. There was nothing to indicate anything unusual. How strange this whole situation was. Only 2 days remained until the fateful night, yet each of us remained firm in our beliefs. However, the number of unanswered questions continued to grow. Who would have the last laugh on Wednesday night? At midnight, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. It took me a minute to understand where I was, who I was, and what I was doing in bed, then another 10 seconds to leap from the bed, barefoot and in my pyjamas, rushing to the door and up to the second floor, where I had heard the sound. It was Dr. Richard's office. No one was there, but the curtains swayed silently in the dark room's air, indicating that the broken pane was here. I turned on the light and saw glass shards scattered on the floor. And as usual, I stepped on 2 of them with my bare foot, letting out a curse as I sat down to pull them out. Then my eyes caught something. There, behind the desk, someone was hiding, trying not to be seen. The person who had violently broken through the glass window for some unknown purpose. If I ran from the room, he might attack me, so I busied myself tending to my foot, cursing loudly. My blood roared in my ears, adrenaline surged in my veins, and my fists tensed. Then, in one swift motion, I leaped onto the desk and threw myself at the intruder. I received a punch to the stomach that knocked the wind out of me, but I gritted my teeth and drove my knee into his lower abdomen. I heard him groan. But who was he? He was masked, and all I could see were his eyes, cold as London's winter, grey as its fog. I struck his nose hard through the mask, feeling the cartilage nearly break, then followed with a punch to his chest. I had never been an athlete, and karate, judo, and taekwondo weren't common in my generation. But any human can fight ferociously when given a strong enough reason. And was there a stronger reason than preventing this maniac from killing me? We grappled in a long, brutal struggle. The bastard was strong and ruthless, but I was terrified, and my fear made me an almost equal opponent. Suddenly, his hand reached for something on the desk. A heavy metallic object came crashing down on my head. No, I won't lose consciousness. I fought it, but the ground betrayed me. I must have been unconscious for no more than 5 minutes. Lying beside me on the floor was a hole puncher, the weapon that had decided the fight. Nausea churned in my stomach, but I forced myself up, staggering toward the open door. I ran down the stairs, knowing exactly where I would find him. The basement. Yes, there he was in the dark beside Count Dracula's coffin. He had turned on an electric flashlight and placed it on the ground beside him. His face was close to the Count's, whispering words I couldn't quite make out, some cryptic pagan prayer or something of the sort. Ah, will this madness never end? I let out a scream that startled even me, grabbed a discarded bottle from the floor, and swung it in the air like a club before lunging at the intruder. Had he not flinched, I would have shattered his skull in seconds. He leaped back like a scalded cat, reached for the flashlight, and switched it off. Then his fists rained down on me in the darkness. This bastard could see in the dark like a bat. This time I didn't put up much of a fight. I lay there for a while, panting in the darkness, the salty taste of blood filling my mouth. I figured I might need to regain some fitness for the next time. Then the basement light flicked on. Dr. Richard and Lavarsky stood around me, dressed in their nightclothes, their eyes puffy from sleep. I sneered bitterly. "Congratulations on your clear consciences. The noise I made was enough to wake the dead, and yet you've only just woken up now." I started recounting what had happened. The moment Dr. Richard heard my story, his face turned pale, and he sprang like a cat toward the office. A terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if he came back, as he always did, claiming that no glass had been broken and that I was just hallucinating? But after a few minutes he returned, looking genuinely concerned. In his hands he held the hole puncher, the same weapon that had nearly smashed my skull minutes ago. He said, "You were lucky, my friend." I pointed at the broken bottle on the floor and said, "And so was that bastard." Dr. Rifat sighed. "We are civilized people, and I believe what happened shouldn't prevent us from dressing appropriately so we can discuss matters in a civilized manner. We shall meet in my office in 10 minutes. Ah, these Englishmen! They expect me, upon discovering a thief in my house, to rise from bed, comb my hair, dress in formal evening wear, then approach the intruder with a gentlemanly bow and say, 'Sir, if you do not leave my house within a minute, I believe I will be forced to make some very serious decisions regarding you.' Ah, damn it. The important thing was that I went back to my room, got dressed, and examined my face in the mirror. Thankfully, there were no permanent disfigurements. But what explanation would these two gentlemen come up with for my short-lived failed adventure? In the office, where the curtain was no longer swaying, I looked at them and asked, "Well, what do you have to say now?" Dr. Lavarsky avoided my eyes and said, "If you want my opinion, I'd say there are some strange events happening, all connected by one thing. Each time we either find you heading toward the basement or sleeping in it." Dr. Richard added, "I'm curious about the next story you'll come up with to justify your nightly trips to the basement." I snapped in frustration, finding them unbearably ignorant and irritating. "Do you think I enjoy that musty basement and that ridiculous mummy? Do you believe I make up lies just to justify my overwhelming love for sitting beside coffins in the dark at night?" Dr. Richard couldn't suppress a smile at my words. He raised a hand, trying to calm me. "I am not accusing you, nor did I say that, but I do believe someone is deliberately trying to lure you into the basement alone." That had never crossed my mind before, but it was true. "Let's assume that's the case. What's supposed to happen down there?" "That," he said, "is exactly why we are here, to figure it out. But why couldn't tonight's visitor just be a simple thief, a regular burglar?" Dr. Lavarsky shot me a meaningful look and replied, "Thieves don't kneel beside coffins and recite cryptic prayers. You said that yourself, remember?" Dr. Richard added, "And burglars don't break glass so carelessly. Either this thief is a fool or he wanted to be heard. And thieves don't enter houses from the second floor when they have first-floor windows available." He cleared his throat, got up and pulled the curtain aside. Then he said, "There's something even stranger. Have you noticed the broken glass? It's just a small opening, not nearly big enough for a person to pass through." I looked into his eyes and said, "But it is big enough for—" "Yes, it was big enough for a bat." Dr. Lavarsky muttered, "More mysteries. Do you want my opinion? I believe some secret society or a cult, maybe devil worshippers, about the mummy we have, and they are trying to steal it." But no one knew what we knew. As long as we learned what we did from the manuscripts, what's stopping others from knowing the same thing? This means we need to be even more careful. There's only one day left anyway. Let's make sure it passes safely, by any means necessary. Then he wagged a finger in my face and warned, "No more mysterious visits to the basement, because next time won't end well. I want Egypt to remain in one piece, without any holes in it." The two men descended the stairs while I lingered behind, lost in thought. If the intruder didn't enter through the window, then he was someone inside the house. If he was strong, then he was a man. If he wasn't me, then he was one of the scholars. And if he had grey eyes and a strong build, then he wasn't Lavarsky. That left only one possibility. Yes, that aligned with what had happened yesterday. Every time something mysterious occurred, Dr. Richard was always involved. Then he would show up to convince me I was hallucinating. But what was this man hiding? He's either playing a cruel practical joke on me or is completely insane, which wouldn't surprise me. Anyone who has spent their life buried in this nonsense must be at least a little mad. But why me in particular? Because I'm the youngest and most reckless? Or because he still carries the colonizers' contempt for the people of the land he occupied? It hasn't even been 3 years since the Suez War. Could he really be that bitter, prejudiced Englishman? I don't understand. In any case, only one day remains, and all I can do is be cautious and wait. I entered my room and locked the door. I walked over to the window and opened it, glancing up at the broken office window above. For a moment, I thought I saw something slowly emerging from the hole in the glass. Then I saw it clearly, a small bat. It quickly stretched its wings, flapped twice in the air, and vanished into the darkness. Wednesday night, everything was prepared. That day, I went on a wonderful countryside stroll with Mrs. Cummings and Catherine. We talked about everything, except the mummy in the basement. I was afraid I might let something slip, but it seemed like she already knew everything. We returned home in the afternoon and had a decent meal. Then Dr. Richard urged us to get some sleep since we'd be staying up all night. In my room, I sank into a deep slumber. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Was the darkness around me part of a dream? Or was I the dream myself? The sun had set and night had fallen, but why hadn't anyone woken me? Then I realized what had awakened me. Footsteps. Strange footsteps echoing in the hallway outside my room. There was something unsettling about them. They weren't the casual steps of someone merely passing by. They were deliberate, slow, measured, meant for me to hear. Cautiously, I reached for the bedside lamp, unplugged its cord, and wrapped it around my hand, ready to use it as a weapon. Slowly, I walked toward the door. Then, to my utter shock, the footsteps resumed, stopping just behind the door. Was it Richard or Lavarsky? But why this secrecy? I reached for the doorknob and opened the door. In the dim hallway light, I saw a familiar silhouette. Dr. Rifat, something has happened. Catherine, what are you doing here? What's going on? She was pale, trembling, her beautiful blue eyes glazed with frozen tears that had yet to fall. There's no one there. I don't understand. There is no one there. All their rooms are empty. Mai, Widad and Lafarsky, all the rooms are empty. All of them. What time is it now? 11 at night. So there's only 1 hour left until the monster rises. But where did they go? Did they leave? Did they hide somewhere? And why did they leave only me and Katerina behind? I'm scared, Dr. Rifat. I slept deeply, and when I woke up I found no one. She was trembling like a leaf. I extended my arm and held her close. Something stirred in my heart. For the first time I realized that I had lived 35 years of my life alone. What a strange feeling, to be responsible for someone, to have someone need you so much that they could cry. I took her hand, and we went down to the basement. Everything was as it was. The cursed coffin was still in place. The bat mummy, the bucket of pig's blood. I said to her, "You know what was supposed to happen tonight, don't you?" She nodded. "Yes." "And you know that there's only an hour left?" "Yes." "Did you search the house thoroughly for the others? And the garden and the basement? There's no one. They left us behind." I lit a cigarette and sat on the edge of the coffin, lost in thought. Should we call the police? We don't have a phone. The nearest one is half an hour away. Fantastic. And then total darkness swallowed the basement. The electricity had gone out. What a time for it to happen. I lit a candle that was lying on the floor. 2 shadows loomed on the wall like 2 giants watching everything we did and said. I exhaled a cloud of smoke and muttered, "Do you know something, my dear? It seems to me that all the threads converge at one point. Forcing you and me to be the only ones responsible for bringing this devil back. Are we truly the right ones for this? Does the devil see in us some hidden evil that makes us the perfect choice?" "We have no choice now," Katerina exclaimed in frustration. "But why are we forced to stay? We can leave this dreadful house and in just half an hour reach civilization, warmth, safety." I shouted at her, No, if we do that, we will forever burn with an insatiable curiosity, forever curse our cowardice, and keep asking a question that will never have an answer. Would Dracula have risen? We are seemingly free, but in reality, we are bound by strong chains of scientific curiosity. We cannot do anything but continue, and we will continue. But, if we waste this opportunity, it won't come again for another 100 years. By then, we would have long been dead without ever knowing the truth. She was young and didn't fully understand everything I was saying, but she couldn't leave on her own. Whoever orchestrated this situation was a devil with a hellish mind, knowing full well that whoever faced this trial would have no choice but to see it through. And where were the others? I didn't know, and there was no time to answer that question. The only thing that mattered now was preparing this place for the Count's arrival. 10 minutes remained until midnight. I brought the bucket of pig's blood closer to the coffin and placed the mummified bat on the mummy's chest. Then I extinguished the candle so as not to disturb the Lord of Darkness upon his awakening. In 7 minutes, Jupiter would align with Mars and the moon would emerge from behind the clouds. In 7 minutes, the world would know forever whether magic was a myth or not, whether the ancients were deluded or not. As for me, I kept muttering like a madman in Arabic, which she didn't understand. This thing will not rise. It will not rise. I am sure of it. Otherwise, we will be in a situation no one would envy. 4 minutes remained. The surprise! The time is now 12:30. Nothing happened. Despite the pitch darkness, I can see the outline of the body lying in the coffin, Catherine's gleaming eyes, and I can smell the scent of formalin. I hear my own heartbeat. Nothing has changed. It was all an illusion. I lit the candle carefully, and it illuminated the place to some extent. The Count looked utterly ridiculous and grotesque beyond description. The same face, the same decaying hair. It was over. I spoke to Catherine, but she did not respond. A strange, vacant look was on her face. This experience had shattered her, but I had no refuge now. The important thing was to find out where the other fools had gone. They might have left for some purpose, or they could be hiding as part of some ridiculous prank, or I lit a cigarette. That sulphuric smell. Strange, I had a lighter. So why was I smelling sulphur? Dr. Richard Cummings, the fool who wasted his life on childish games, that obese Jew, and me, I would return to Cairo carrying nothing but faint memories. The scent of sulphur. Now I can confidently say that science is science and everything else is nonsense. But why are you looking at me like that, Catherine, with those infatuated eyes? I was still handsome, still had my hair, but I was never attractive to that extent, especially to a teenage girl. Catherine, let's go upstairs. She didn't respond. Suddenly she burst into hysterical laughter. Laughing and laughing in the darkness. The poor girl had lost her mind. Then she staggered to the bucket of blood, dipped her index finger in it, and licked it with delight. Catherine, you're insane. She turned to me, her lips now crimson, and whispered in a cold voice, You still don't understand, you fool. You don't understand. How strange. She had completely lost it. The coffin had remained in place all these centuries, with the Count lying inside, the ivory box on his chest. That's why Dr. Lavarsky's story seemed illogical and misleading. It was impossible for him to be killed and laid back in the coffin in the exact same position every time. You'll never understand, you idiot. Her teeth gleamed in the darkness, and that's when I understood everything. Dracula had never risen from his coffin. The rituals took place beside it every 100 years, and then his soul transferred into one of the participants, who would become the new Dracula. In this case, Catherine and I were the chosen ones. That's why the others had been eliminated somehow. And now, after midnight, Catherine had changed completely. Catherine had drunk the blood. Her sharp teeth gleamed in the dark, and the cursed scent of sulphur filled the air. And I was trapped with her in the basement. I understood everything far too late. Dr. Rifat, come and kiss me, a seductive voice coming from a distant world. So this was it. Come, and that's why I didn't turn into one of them. I hadn't been a vampire's first meal. But what would I have been fed on? Would I have become a vampire myself? And then, before I could even comprehend what had happened, my legs carried me away. I ran as I had never run before in my life. I burst out of the basement, through the hallway, past the house's entrance. The pitch-black darkness made me crash hundreds of times into unknown objects. My heart pounded, threatening to leap out of my throat. The garden bathed in moonlight, and I ran, until from a distance I saw the lights of civilization and ordinary people. Within 24 hours, I was back in my happy home in Doki, Cairo. I spent countless days imagining Catherine wandering the barren lands surrounding her home, searching for unsuspecting travelers. I pictured her meeting her end with a wooden stake through her heart. Months later, I gathered my courage and sent a letter to Dr. Richard, or at least to his last known address. But no response came. I sent 3 more letters until I finally received a reply from the new owner of the house, telling me that Dr. Richard no longer lived there, that he had moved to Australia with his family, and they had no idea where exactly. How many dark nights did I spend reliving and analysing what had happened? Had I been hallucinating? Had it all been just a dream? Or was it simply that the girl had suffered a mental breakdown from that horrific experience? Or was it real? A reality where I had been locked in a basement with a vampire? I do not know, and I never will. Had Catherine been killed by an untainted human, someone like her father, who then fled to Australia? Or had she slaughtered her family that night and then come to my room, wailing and weeping? Or was the entire ordeal nothing but a cruel scientific hoax, masterfully orchestrated? So many questions without answers, and I do not wish for answers. All I know is that I will never again attend any conference on blood diseases. I will never set foot in Yorkshire or Australia. And I will never, ever watch a Dracula film. Many strands of my hair turned grey as I waited for Count Dracula's vengeance to reach me in my home in Doki, especially since I was, as far as I knew, the last person to uncover his truth. I bundled garlic and hung it behind my windows and doors, surrounded myself with silverware and Quranic verses. But nothing happened. Thank God. Either divine protection saved me, or I had been foolish in my fears all along. And 2 years after these events, I encountered a different kind of devil in another place, one that made me forget everything that had happened. But that is another story. The first part has ended, by the grace of God. The Land of Legends. Esteban looked at the flickering flame of the burning candle, then at the faces of those seated around him, and whispered, "My friends, the one who is possessed is one of the people sitting at this very table." But before we reach that part, let's go back a few days, to my very first visit to Romania. I was 34 years old, and 2 years had passed since my terrifying adventure with Count Dracula. Naively, I thought that my troubles were finally over, and that the time had come to get married, start a small family, and open a clean little clinic as soon as I returned from this scientific mission. At one of the universities in Cluj, I met the Romanian journalist Gustav Vicolscu, a remarkably intelligent young man with a sharp sense of humour. He spoke English like a native, was well read in literature and the humanities, and took it upon himself to guide me through every step of my journey. He taught me a great deal about Romania, a country I knew very little about, or, to be honest, absolutely nothing. What's the dominant religion here? The majority of the population are Romanian Orthodox. And communism. He smiled discreetly, then leaned closer and whispered meaningfully, "Comrade, communism will never change Romania. Romania is unique in Europe. It will never truly change." Romania, as he told me, means land of Rome. The name comes from the great Roman leader Trajan, who conquered the region and expelled the barbarians in the Battle of Dacia in 106 AD. Since then, it became a Roman province. Later, the Goths invaded it, followed by the Slavs in the 6th century AD. I suppose the Slavs gave Romania its distinct character? To some extent, but more importantly, they divided it into 2 regions, Transylvania and Wallachia. Transylvania, where the Count's castle is. Dracula? Yes, it's a land steeped in legends. Its most famous tourist attraction is Count Dracula's castle. We must visit it together. It's a place that fires the imagination to the extreme. You fool, what do you know about that castle? About the Count's coffin, his servant, and? In fact, Transylvania is also home to Frankenstein's castle, as described by Madame Mary Shelley. What a magnificent country. Sure. Anyway, I was telling you that the Turks invaded Romania, and a great battle took place between them and Stephen the Great on the plains of Rakova. Then Turkey, the sick man of Europe, ceded parts of the country to Austria in the Treaty of Passarowitz. So when did you become free then? That happened in 1856, when Prince Alexandru Cuza was elected to rule. After World War I, we annexed Bukovina from Russia. Then came World War II, and General Antonescu took power on behalf of the Nazis. As a result, we lost Bukovina again, along with parts of Transylvania, which returned to Hungary. After the war, we became a communist state under the Soviet Union. That conversation took place in 1961, and none of us could have imagined what would happen to Romania or to communism itself 30 years later. I asked him, "Why do you people like communism?" "We don't really. It's not by choice. Moscow doesn't give anyone a chance to choose. Besides, we were desperate for any kind of change after the oppression of the former regime." "Could I use your cigarette to light mine?" I handed him a cigarette, and he exclaimed, "You see, before 1947, this would have been a crime punishable by jail for both of us." "What crime?" "Lighting a cigarette from another cigarette. Monopoly laws back then required citizens to use a matchstick for that purpose, just to boost the matchstick trade." I burst out laughing. I had never imagined such ingenuity in restricting personal freedom. What utter human ignorance. Gustav said, "You'll see many strange things in Romania. For now, you should head back to your hotel and get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." It was a wonderful 2-week tour. We visited the universities of Cluj, the ancient churches of Bucharest, and the taverns of Mamaia on the Black Sea coast, where tough sailors shared thrilling tales. We also visited the port of Constanța, Romania's most important harbour. But what moved me the most was my visit to Transylvania. Transylvania is a low basin in the western part of the country, bordered by the Transylvanian Alps. To the north, you'll find Romania's steel industry hubs, followed by the region of Crișana. That name sounds familiar to me. The Carpathians are a pastoral region, medium-height mountains covered in grasslands, and to the south flows the Danube River. The Blue Danube. There's no Red Danube, as far as I know. That night, we visited the old crumbling castle of Count Dracula. I remembered its details from the photographs I'd seen during my previous visit. I couldn't help but shiver as I imagined Dr. Richard and Vofarsky sneaking into the ruins at night, searching for Dracula's mummy. I recalled the villagers' fear of even passing by it. This place pulses with a certain spirit, something that cannot be described. Gustav said to me, "Romania's folklore is full of horror stories. Mothers here scare their children with tales of vampires, werewolves, and Nosferatu." Why Romania in particular? Either because of the vivid local imagination, or because these creatures really do exist here. The storm. Gustav's car sped down the rugged, branching road as heavy rain poured relentlessly onto the window pane. The warm glass fogged up from our breath, and I kept wiping it down with my handkerchief from time to time. From a distance, through the dense, dark forests, a tongue of lightning would occasionally rip across the sky, bathing everything in a cold, harsh blue light before vanishing again. And seconds later, thunder would roar as if the stars themselves were colliding above us. "It's the Krivat! The Krivat!" It's a fierce winter wind that sweeps through these regions. It devastates the crops, a true curse for the farmers. What a dreadful omen. Don't be gloomy, comrade. You've only seen the smiling face of Romania. It's time you saw her when she bares her fangs. We were crossing the Danube Delta in the south of the country. All the birds had fled before the storm, and only a few wolves remained in the vast forests searching for shelter. The snow began to fall, light and soft, yet powerful. In mere seconds, the forests were blanketed in a beautiful white. I had never seen snow before, and it felt like I was dreaming. Suddenly, the scene transformed into the stage of some fairy tale. Yes, the human imagination must awaken in a place like this. It must. Magnificent! You mean you've never seen snow before today? Yes. Didn't you say you visited England and France several times? I did, but always in clear weather, unfortunately. He burst out laughing, lit a cigarette, and said, "The Danube Delta is full of pelicans, herons, bears, and leopards." Leopards? Of course. You haven't truly seen Romania yet, my friend, and it seems you're going to see much more of it from now on. What do you mean? I mean, we won't be able to continue in this weather without chains on the tyres. Gustav began inspecting the road map, then muttered. The nearest city to us is Tersvarin, but it's quite a distance away. However, there's a small village called Krajovska, just 10 minutes from here. I think it's our only hope. The important thing is to move quickly before that becomes impossible. I agreed with him because the warm blood in my veins from the Nile Valley was beginning to freeze. I was wearing 2 pullovers and a coat, and under my trousers, that thick cotton underwear my late mother had given me when I first went to Alexandria. Yet still I was shivering. My nose had started to run, and I realized I was in bad shape, very bad. Gustav put the map back in the dashboard, then tried to start the engine several times. I held my breath, not wanting to imagine what would happen if the car refused to start, and then finally it did. We drove in silence, surrounded only by snow-covered trees glowing in the car's headlights, and from a distance a wolf or two could be seen running away from the road. Gustav? What about frostbite? And if you don't know, frostbite is a type of gangrene that affects the extremities in extreme cold and can lead to amputation. He replied with something like, God forbid. I'm not joking, I can't feel my toes. Anyway, it's not that cold, we're not in Siberia, so stop acting like a child. I stayed silent, cursing him in my head, cursing the Danube Delta and this Krivats, or whatever it's called. I started imagining myself returning to Cairo without feet, begging near the Hussein Mosque, or falling prey to the merciless grey wolves of Romania. Would they honour my memory back at the Faculty of Medicine? Maybe name the bathroom after me. The Martyr Rifat Ismail Memorial Restroom. At that time, I didn't know I would live another 30 years, healthy and intact. And today, I remember that in every crisis I faced throughout my life, and there were many, I always believed it would be my last. That's why I never truly enjoyed anything, nor did I learn. When you enter a haunted house at an amusement park or watch a horror movie, you know for certain that, no matter what you see, you'll return home safe afterward. That's why you can fully experience it. But me, I didn't know. The lesson I learned after many long years was to always assume I would make it out of any crisis safely. That way I could maintain a clear mind and keep my thoughts in order. Panic helps no one, and death is a written appointment that no fear or caution will change. If it comes, then let me die like a man, smiling, confident. But I didn't understand that back then. And from afar the village lights appeared. It was 10 o'clock at night. The streets were covered in snow and darkness was nearly complete, except for the faint glow behind shuttered windows. I shivered at the thought of families huddled around fireplaces, eating hot meals. Now, we had to find an inn. In front of a wooden sign, dimly lit by a lamp, Gustav stepped out of the car. He knocked on the door with a brass knocker hanging beside it and called out something in Romanian. A gruff voice replied from inside. When you hear a language you don't understand, it always feels like the words are rushing between people's lips at a speed impossible to follow. Gustav yelled, and the voice inside yelled back. What's going on? The car came to a halt for a moment, and Gustav examined the scattered houses lining both sides of the road. They all looked alike, old wooden homes with small windows, and in front of every door, iron crosses were planted in the ground. He furrowed his brows and said, This is strange. I hadn't noticed that before. I said, while watching one of the windows where a curtain was swiftly pulled back, as if someone had been watching us and quickly stepped away. It seems like the villagers are afraid of something. Gustav lit a cigarette, took a long drag, then said, People in the countryside here believe in all sorts of superstitions. Maybe they're afraid of something we don't know about. I whispered, watching the thick darkness wrapping around the village. Or maybe they know something we don't. The church. We arrived at the ancient church in the village, our last hope for a place to spend the night. Gustav got off the carriage and walked toward the rusty iron door of the church, clapping his hands. He didn't forget to point at an iron cross planted in the ice in front of the door, then gave me a look that clearly said, You were right about what you noticed. A few minutes later, a lantern's light flickered inside, and the rusty door slowly opened, revealing a wrinkled face. It was the priest. His white beard and thick eyeglasses reminded me of the Romanian Orthodox priests I had known in Alexandria. Gustav spoke to him briefly, and the priest shook his head in disapproval, then gestured for us to come in. I shut the car door behind me and leapt inside, shivering from the cold. We climbed worn-out steps to a spacious room, and there it was, the precious red flame of a fireplace dancing as if to welcome us. An elderly woman was sitting by the fire, knitting. The priest introduced her with some words I didn't understand. Gustav said, "Miss Antonescu, the priest's sister." There were a few prayer books on an old wooden table, 2 candle holders and several icons. The room was old but clean, cosy and warm. We sat by the fire, feeling the heat penetrate our bones, melting the marrow inside them. As for Father Antonescu, he got up and fetched a small bottle, pouring something into 2 ceramic cups. He handed one to Gustav and one to me. I looked at Gustav questioningly, and he said, "Hot rum, to get your blood flowing." I declined and handed him the cup to drink in my place, while he explained to the priest, "Muslim." He said it in Romanian, just as we pronounce it in Arabic. The priest looked at him kindly. "Aha, Muslim." A brief conversation followed, and of course I understood its essence. Where did I come from? How did I end up in this cursed corner of the world, in this freezing cold, while my homeland is among the warmest and most beautiful places on earth? If I spoke Romanian, I would have told him, "I am mad, kind man, mad and foolish, and I am seeking my own end." The old lady returned gently, carrying a steaming pot with a fragrant aroma, 2 long loaves of bread, and a plate with some slices of meat. The priest pointed at the meat and said something that didn't require much effort for me to understand. Gustav said, "He's telling you this meat is lamb, not pork, right?" How did you know? The language of gestures and glances is universal, my friend. If you ever watched a film in Bengali, you'd understand 80% of its story without any effort. At the table, we sat sipping the soup. I had no idea what it was, though after tasting it, I leaned toward believing it was shoe soup. Floating in it were terrifying things. But it was hot, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Gustav and the priest were engaged in a conversation I couldn't understand a word of. A torrent of sh and cake sounds poured over my head, as if threatening to blow the entire table away. Is Romanian really that harsh a language? The priest's eyes widened behind his glasses as he stressed every consonant, and Gustav looked skeptical, though he had stopped chewing, which told me the matter had piqued his interest to some extent. The priest then made the sign of the cross. "What are you 2 talking about, Gustav?" He looked at me mockingly, then said, "Guess! Aren't you an expert in Bengali films?" Gestures, my friend, gestures. All right, enough joking. There's some belief the priest holds and fears deeply, but you don't believe it, although it seems the story is starting to affect you. Okay, you're right. And to be more specific, he's saying that the devil, or an evil spirit, or something of that sort, is roaming the village on this cursed night. That's why the villagers locked their doors and planted crosses on them. And he's praying to the Lord to protect us tonight. He looked at me doubtfully and asked, "Didn't you say you don't speak a word of Romanian?" "I really don't. But it's the gestures, like I told you. Besides, it's always the same story. I learned that from the tales of Edgar Allan Poe." "And did you also pick up from the gestures that it ripped 2 men apart last night?" "Who did?" "Belasco the Mad, or in other words, the sin that used to be a man." Horror in the village. I cried out in shock. Are you talking about the legend of the man who turns into a wolf when the moon is full?" He replied with a triumphant tone, having finally piqued my curiosity. Romania is the homeland of that legend, more precisely the Danube Plain, and to be geographically exact, it seems this village is its birthplace, unfortunately. Then he took another spoonful of his soup and motioned for me to continue eating. But what I had already eaten had turned into a brick in my stomach. Another myth chasing me in this forgotten corner of the world, as if I were the only one qualified for these filthy missions. But the moon had been full last night. According to the legend, the village should be calm and peaceful now, after the chaos of the full moon night. The madman should have returned to being human. Gustav exchanged a few words with Father Antonescu, then turned to me. 3 days. So the madman roams and wreaks havoc in the village for 3 whole days. That's too long, which means tomorrow night is the final night of the cycle. I think so. I resumed finishing my soup while the conversation between Gustav and the priest continued. I turned to Gustav and said, "You told the priest you don't believe a word of it." "Gustav, that's not appropriate. Those are his personal beliefs. And he's inviting you to visit the church early tomorrow to hear what the men there will say. But apologize to him. I didn't mean to offend. You're just so." They went back to talking again, and I heard the word tos phosphoratu mentioned several times. Then Gustav pointed at the priest, laughing. "He's asking you about your adventure with Count Dracula." I looked at him with irritation and said, "Tell him I got terrifyingly close to the story, but to this very moment I'm not sure of anything. It could all be a chain of delusions or a cruel joke I swallowed whole, but I do know one thing. I found no physical evidence that a vampire has ever lived or exists in this world. And my stance on myths hasn't and won't ever change. Anything that can't be seen, heard, smelled or reasoned with doesn't exist. That's my opinion on the Dracula legend." Gustav corrected me. "Nosferatu, that's what they prefer to call him here, and in Poland and Hungary too." "Yes, they're right. It does sound a bit more endearing." They went back to talking for another 10 minutes. Then Gustav turned to me and said, "The priest says you're wrong." What a poetic language. It would probably take me 2 hours just to say good evening. I yawned, and the priest said something to the old lady. She immediately got up, holding a kerosene lamp, and slowly led us to a small room with 2 clean beds. She said something which was, no doubt, good evening in Romanian. We collapsed onto the beds in our clothes, since our bags were still in the car, and neither of us was willing to step back into the freezing darkness just to put on pajamas. I sank into a deep sleep. Strange is the howling of wolves in this village. A strong, raspy, painful sound, like a person suffering in the depths of hell. It woke me 3 times after midnight. Each time I recited Ayat al-Kursi and went back to sleep, imagining that wretched creature, that cursed being, wandering through the darkness and snow, hunting for prey. In the morning, Gustav and I went out to walk through the village. The first task was to find what the car needed to continue the journey. The second was to go to the tavern, as the priest had said. We might find something important there, for me or for Gustav. At the village garage, Gustav approached a fat man soaked in sweat and grease, yelling loudly. My friend spoke to him, but the man just kept yelling. Then Gustav came back to me, and I said with a smile, "Everyone in this village yells and refuses your requests." He replied sternly, "This isn't a joke. He says the snow blocks have sealed all the roads, and the only telephone line is cut. They haven't been able to call in the snowplows." Which means, yes, exactly, it means we're prisoners in this village until the ice melts. At the tavern, Gustav ordered some rum for himself and coffee for me, and we sat amidst a sea of thick Slavic moustaches and suspicious stares. Muscular men made even bulkier by the fur coats they wore, and nearly all of them were armed with massive old rifles. They were all shepherds, living a life so rugged it defied description. And now they found themselves face to face with 2 delicate fellows like you and me. Gustav said that while sipping his drink, as I shrank into my seat in the midst of this unwelcoming atmosphere, the tavern owner approached us, and Gustav pulled out a handful of 4-lei bills and shoved them into his hand, saying something. Suddenly, the men's faces lit up with joy, and they began gulping down their rum in terrifying merriment. It was that old trick, drinks for everyone on me. And just like that, all hostility and human barriers dissolved in seconds. A strong man came over, dragged a chair to our table and shook my and Gustav's hands with a grip that nearly crushed our fingers. He said Esteban Hershevich, Gustav Nicolescu, Rafat Ismail. Gustav asked him something in Romanian. The man started thinking, then began telling a long, horrifying story, groaning from time to time. Then he shouted emotionally, and Gustav put an arm around his shoulder and said, he lost his friend the day before yesterday. His friend suddenly remembered he hadn't locked the sheep pen, so he left his wife and 2 children and went out into the darkness. Just a few seconds, but that was enough. His wife heard a terrible scream, and when she ran out armed to see what had happened, she found her husband torn to pieces on the ground. Next to him were the footprints of the possessed one. And the other? It was the village idiot, Constantine. And what about last night? Nothing, as far as he knows. We were the candidates for this honor if the priest hadn't hosted us. I shouted angrily. So they left us out there. Those cowards didn't open their doors, hoping we'd be a guaranteed dinner for our dear friend Belasco. What brilliant strategy. Gustav spoke with the shepherd again, then turned to me and said, "He says no one opened their doors for us because the possessed one can sometimes speak in a human voice, giving convincing excuses. In his opinion, Father Antoniescu committed a crime against himself and his sister by letting us into his house last night." I downed the rest of my coffee, then asked, "Ask him who this possessed one is. Do they know him? He says if they knew, they'd kill him, but he's definitely one of them, and they've killed many before him." "What? There have been many." "Of course, there's always one. The legend says that whoever is wounded by the possessed one will turn into another possessed one the following month. It's like a plague. If you kill the first victim, the second victim remains. And when you kill him, the world will be cursed with a third. And so it goes, a long chain from the Middle Ages to the Day of Judgment." "How do they kill the possessed one?" "It requires driving a silver blade into his heart, of course, while he's in his human form, because, in his wolf form, he is at his strongest. He could easily uproot a tree from the ground. How do they know it's him, when he's in his human form?" They started talking again, and Esteban pointed to a man dressed in rough clothes, with a bald head. The man approached, and Esteban asked him something. The man pulled out a bundle from his coat and threw it on the table, eyeing me suspiciously. "Esteban says everyone in the village knows that if they're attacked by the possessed one, they should try to wound him in some way. If they survive, then we start looking for the person who has that wound, and he will be executed with a silver blade. And this bundle. This man is called Ado. He was attacked by the possessed one last month in the woods. He managed to rip a claw off of him before escaping. In the morning, he found something else in his pocket instead of the claw. Something like chocolate, perhaps?" Esteban slowly unwrapped the bundle. It was a withered finger, a human finger, with a ring set with a blue gemstone. Ido didn't need to search very hard for who had lost their finger in the village. In fact, he didn't even have to leave his house. This ring was his wife's. "Ekaterina." I gasped in shock. "Oh my God." Goose swallowed hard. "This is what they say. I don't believe it, but their story is terrifyingly well plotted," I said, frustrated. "Of course, he killed his wife with a silver blade." "Of course," he replied. "And so any murderer could kill his wife, cut off her finger, and then run through the village claiming he discovered she was possessed and that he executed the punishment of heaven on her." Instinctively turned to the two men to relay my opinion, and I shouted, "No, you fool. We won't leave here alive." He stopped speaking, but the two men must have guessed what I said, or nearly did. Damn this language of gestures. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, and I felt his dirty hand reach for the hilt of the dagger hanging from his belt. "I commend your enthusiasm for translating. Try to change the subject." And Esteban began speaking again in his deep, rough voice, while Ido folded the bundle and stuffed it back into his pocket, casting me a fiery glare. Goose continued. "A year ago, Stefano succeeded in cutting off the limb of a possessed man with an axe. In the morning, the clawed, hairy leg turned into a human leg. That same day, they found the mayor's son had lost his leg in an accident. Of course, his father executed the judgment himself." How horrendous. The new possessed one, Belasco, no one has been able to identify him or even wound him yet. At that moment, my eyes fell upon the most beautiful sight I had ever seen in my life. Words could not express the effect this beauty had on my soul. I needed a more delicate, more beautiful language, perhaps music. A girl with black eyes, black hair, and dark clothes stood beside Esteban and looked at me with a steady gaze that melted me with embarrassment. She said something to Esteban, who answered her roughly. "What a jerk." Said something else, looking disgusted. Said, "She's Etrina. the innkeeper's daughter. She says she wants to tell you something, but Esteban scolded her and told her that women should be silent when men speak. The monster. Then I thought for a moment, and an idea struck me. Gusf, tell me, of course this inn has a place to sleep. Of course, like every filthy inn in the world. Then tell the innkeeper that we would like to stay the night here. But why? There's the inn and the church. No, I want to stay here. Has your mouth watered at the sight of the first girl in the village? She isn't. I never claimed that for a moment. I just want to be near her tonight. The night of the cursed transformation. Oh, what romance, how fiery your Mediterranean hearts are. He called the innkeeper and told him of my request. The innkeeper nodded in welcome and gestured for me to follow him up a rickety wooden staircase to the dirtiest room I had ever seen in my life. It was the epitome of misery, poverty, and degradation. Even the bathroom was just a rusty bucket beside the bed, which wasn't much better. And now listen, my friend, Rifat. I know what you're going to say. You go and sleep in the inn, and I'll stay. You've found your fate. He said it while spitting on the ground, which, to be honest, his spit didn't make any dirtier. He turned to ask me one last question at the door. What about the translation? Then he shook his head, adding, I forgot the language of gestures and glances, and closed the door before I could respond appropriately to his rudeness. I sat on the bed and looked around in disgust. Am I really that much of a teenager? Or was there some hidden motive that made me do what I did? The door knocked, and my heart leaped into my throat. I imagined her slender, sensitive, cold hand knocking on the door to say something in Romanian that would kill me. I opened the door eagerly and found the fat innkeeper laughing at me, showing his decayed teeth. The weakest smile he could muster. I seek refuge in God. He handed me a torn towel and a soap stained with grease, then bowed to imply the service was excellent, and left. It was crystal clear that he was the one who would be taking care of me in this room. It was now 2 p.m. There was no point in wasting the entire day in this pigsty. I decided to catch up with Gusf in the downstairs tavern to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. The door knocked again. Surely, the scoundrel was going to give me a favel or something for lunch. I went to the door and opened it, only to find Ekaterina. But tell me, can anything be more beautiful or pure than this? I went crazy. I say, am I dreaming, or is she speaking English? Poor English, actually, but understandable. You, the wolf, do you care? I do. It occurred to me, I don't know why, that she might understand me better if I spoke broken English. It's a reflex we sometimes have, even in Arabic, when someone speaks our language. The sin, it's here. Where? In this tavern. In the beginning, the jumbled words from the girl speaking are because English isn't her first language in the novel, and so she isn't fluent in speaking. Let's continue the story. She said, trembling like a leaf, I attacked 1 month ago, in the storehouse he does. I escape. I wound wolf. He wound in head. It's an intriguing story. So, the werewolf attacked her last month, and she managed to escape and wound him in the head. And thus, when dawn broke, there was one man with a head wound, one she knew, and now he is drinking alcohol in the tavern's basement. He, I don't know, wears. A head covering? Yes, a head covering. Wears, Milo Instant wears, head. That's normal, my dear. In this weather, even the devil himself would wear a head covering. No, he. They never take off. Did you understand that part? It's an important point. Normally, shepherds drink, get drunk, and fight. But there are 5 of them who, throughout the past month, under no circumstance have ever been seen with their heads uncovered. This suspicious insistence on covering their heads sparked her suspicion. A clever idea, but there's a fact that shouldn't be forgotten, which is that the girl is crazy, completely crazy. If we overlook her beauty, her frailty, and her trembling, help me, will you? Yes, my dear, I will help you. But how can I abandon my convictions and my faith in science to put my trust in your fabricated story about a head wound, a story that might lead to the slaughter of the first poor soul who happened to bump his head on the window frame or got hit with a brick by a naughty child? He patted her shoulder reassuringly and walked her to the door, from which she left, making the sign of the cross. He went down to the tavern, the basement, and found Gustav, sitting at a table with Esteban, who had become completely drunk. He sat at the same table and began to study the rough faces of the men as they laughed loudly and exchanged crude, vulgar jokes full of punches and insults. One of them is the werewolf, as she said. But which one? What names did she mention? These names don't stick in memory. And Stefano. Then Qatar. No, then Milo. One left. Esteban, of course. It's Esteban sitting at this table with us. He looked at him and studied his hairy face as he spoke with Gustav. It was completely understandable that the girl thought this man was a werewolf. He didn't need fangs and claws to be terrifying. But how did the legend of the werewolf begin? The same theme is repeated in one form or another in R.L. Stevenson's masterpiece, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the good, respectable man who transforms under certain circumstances. Turning into a predatory devil, is this some sort of human philosophy suggesting that each of us has two sides, one white and one black? Is it a naive attempt to explain cases of schizophrenia where a person turns into their opposite without clear reason? In any case, the idea is terrifying, and I don't deny that for a second, and I believe that seeing Gustav transform before my eyes into a wolf-like creature would be enough to turn me into another myth without uttering a single word. It's now 5 p.m. I approached Gustav, and the smell of alcohol from his mouth nearly killed me, and I said, "Is there any way to make these men remove their head coverings? I want to see their heads uncovered. Are you crazy? First you suddenly decide to spend the night here, and now you want to see the shepherds' heads. The frost. No. My brain hasn't frozen. Please do something. Let me think. You could, for example, invite them to drink a toast and ask them to remove their hats in honor of the toast. Are you joking? We're not in a London club. These gentlemen are far from refined. Then let's bring in an icon or something sacred to force them to remove their head coverings out of respect. They don't uncover their heads even in church. Then, at that moment, stood up, staggering and holding the bottle in his hand, and said, "There's an easier and more certain way," and he shouted something in Romanian. Voices of astonishment rose, and I saw all eyes looking at me with hatred, contempt, or suspicion. One of them shouted in outrage, "What did you say to them, you fool?" I told them exactly what you wanted without sugarcoating it. I said the gentleman from Egypt would like, with your permission, to see your heads uncovered. You idiot. He was drunk, and put me in a situation that was not only embarrassing but dangerous for my life as well. They were all looking at me with clenched fists. Some took it as an insult, some saw it as stupidity, and some thought it was a whim. One of them, no doubt, realized that I knew everything. Approached me, glaring with fiery eyes. Then he slammed his fist on the table and began shouting a lot of words I could barely grasp were directed at me. Gustav said, "He says you're arrogant, rude, and a son of a—" I said it while trembling, and he says he demands an explanation. I swallowed hard, avoided the fiery gazes of the men, and said, "Tell him to sit down so I can explain, on the condition that no one else hears us." Gustav conveyed the meaning of my words to him, and he paused for a moment, eyeing us with suspicion and hatred. Then he made up his mind. He turned to the men and ordered them to do something, then pulled up his chair and sat at the table in front of me. In quick phrases, I told him what the girl had said to me in my room. And I told him that I suspected him, and that I demanded the truth be revealed before nightfall. He furrowed his brow and took a swig from Gustav's bottle, then wiped his moustache with the back of his hairy hand, and continued to stare at my face for a while, then stood up and shouted at the men at the top of his voice. A somewhat handsome young man came, his head wrapped in a filthy bandana. "Kotha!" A short, fat man rose from his seat and came to our table. Milo Instat. Milo woke up from his brief nap at the bar table and came over, adjusting his fox fur hat. George. A bearded young man came, wearing a head covering made of leather. Esteban turned to the rest of the men and said something, and tension filled the air. One of them got up to close the door, the tavern door, and the men he had called over began rolling up their sleeves. They understood that he had summoned them to tear me apart, which seemed entirely plausible to me, since all that Romanian talk might have meant, This gentleman claims you are werewolves, so take your revenge." Turned to me and said something, then gestured for the men to sit at the table, and then began to speak in his deep voice, pressing on each word. Translated, he's retelling what you said, and he's telling them, "Comrades, the werewolf is one of the 5 sitting at this table. He is asking them to uncover their heads, and swears he will blow off the head of anyone who refuses with his rifle." And slowly, reluctantly, the men began revealing their heads. Silence filled the place, and dry throats waited anxiously for what would happen. 4 heads were uncovered. Then, with a dramatic gesture, Esteban reached for his own head covering, pulled it off, and placed it on the table. If the girl had been lying about the wound, I would have been in serious trouble. All the heads were unharmed. Only 2 heads, those of Stefano and Milo Instat, had wounds, long cuts covered by strands of hair. The men shouted in excitement, while the 2 wounded men began explaining something in panic. Of course, each was trying to explain where and how he got that wound. Esteban began to speak again. This man had a powerful presence and great influence among his people. Voices of agreement grew louder, while the 2 wounded men looked increasingly miserable. I turned to Gustav, who had been swept up in the events and was no longer translating, and asked, "Esteban says the situation has become clearer, and that we will all sit here throughout the night until one of the 2 men turns into a werewolf, and that heaven itself will decide the outcome. But how is the werewolf to be killed then? The first signs of transformation are the reddening of the pupils, and he will watch them like a hawk, waiting for the first sign from either of them. Then he will slit his throat with a silver knife before the transformation is complete." The interview. The minutes passed slowly and tediously as we sat in the tavern, gathered around Stefano and Milo Instat, both bareheaded, crying and trembling. Time passed, slowly. Suddenly someone shouted something, and everyone turned to Milo. They said his eyes had turned red. Indeed, his eyes were bloodshot. But the redness was in the conjunctiva, the white of the eyes. And this, of course, was due to excessive crying along with all the heat, smoke, and suffocating air. But that's not the pupil, it's the conjunctiva. And do you expect these shepherds to know the anatomical difference between the pupil and the conjunctiva? It's a red eye, and that's enough. The shepherds cried out enthusiastically, overcome by the thrill of the moment, while Milo froze in his seat, struck with indescribable terror, like a mouse caught in a trap, realizing there's no point in wasting its final moments resisting. I felt nauseous and on the verge of vomiting. I pulled myself together and headed to the door. Gustav called out to me, "What is it, my friend?" "Vomiting." "And the werewolf, aren't you detaining him here?" I opened the wooden door, and outside there was ice and the cold night air. I felt better, but deep inside I had a sense of regret for all that I had caused. Perhaps my foolishness would lead to a massacre. But this was the only solution I had found to save my own life from the mess caused by Gustav's recklessness. And of course it was Ekaterina's foolishness that had started this entire chain of foolish actions that would lead to Milo being slaughtered before my eyes. The noise of the men grew louder inside the tavern behind the window, and I realized I had to find a way out. But what? I don't want to see a man die because he has conjunctivitis, but how can I stop it? And then I heard a wild roar. I looked up and found myself face to face with the werewolf. Has any of you ever fallen into the clutches of a werewolf? Those who've lived through such an experience can skip this part, but for the lucky ones who haven't, I say it's a horrifying ordeal. To see in front of you a giant creature wearing human clothes, but with the face of a massive wolf, and the hands are wolf claws, and the voice, a wolf, standing on its hind legs, its eyes red like blood, its mouth open, revealing sharp white fangs, its chest heaving with a hellish growl, and this creature is attacking you! What do you do? You'll scream, but aren't these more like final screams than cries for help? You try to run across the slippery ice, but it's surely faster than you. You try to kick or hit it, but it's as solid as a wall. You'll fall to the ground, curling up as it crouches over you like a nightmare, its claws ripping the flesh of your face. With desperate strength, you punch it hard in its red eye, it howls and jumps off you, and in the next moment, The shepherds surround you, having rushed out from the tavern at the noise of the struggle, and the beast flees through the snow. That's exactly what happened to me. Inside the tavern, they sat me down and wiped my face with damp cloth, and handed me something in a cup, which I drank before asking what it was. Gustav wrapped his arm around my shoulder anxiously and asked, "What happened?" It was him. "Belasco? Yes! Heavens, so it wasn't Milo! Did you doubt that? Then who is it?" "I don't know, but I gave him a fierce punch that nearly burst his left eye." Gustav turned to the shepherds and relayed my words. Relief was evident on the faces of the two accused young men, while everyone began talking excitedly. Tomorrow, of course, will be a dreadful day for anyone who took a hit or had something thrown at their left eye, but they were still eyeing me with suspicion and readiness. Esteban pointed at me and said something doubtfully. Gustav shouted at him enthusiastically, denying whatever it was. "What happened?" "What is it, Gustav?" "Nothing. They're considering getting rid of you now." "What? Before you kill their children? Me? How?" "Next month, when you turn into a werewolf." "Werewolf? How?" He looked at me with a meaningful expression and whispered, "He scratched your face in several places. Didn't you notice that?" But I sat in my place, listening to the debates and shouting, lost in thought. It's strange that just yesterday at this time, I knew nothing about the story of the werewolf. Isn't it odd that within 24 hours I've become so deeply entangled in the problem that I myself am now on the way to becoming a werewolf? What progress? I knew very well that the story had no truth to it, and that what I had faced outside had a scientific explanation. But the urgent problem now was dealing with these bloodthirsty madmen who wanted nothing but violence. With difficulty, despite his obvious drunkenness, Gustav managed to save my life by convincing the shepherds to wait, to show me mercy, with the assurance that next month I wouldn't be in the village or even in Romania at all, but rather back in Egypt, where the happy Nile Valley would be blessed with the legend of the werewolf. In other words, Romania would export the werewolf infection to all of Africa. That's enough excitement for one night. Slowly I stood up, and with steady steps I climbed the stairs. No one stopped me. I headed to my filthy room, took off my shoes and threw myself onto the bed, feeling it rise and fall beneath me. What a day, what a day. The door creaked open slowly. Let it be the werewolf or the devil himself. I couldn't get up or fight back. If he wants to devour me, let him do it without waking me. That's Ekaterina's soft voice. "Is there something you need, sir?" I replied with my eyes still closed. "No, my angel. No, nothing." She closed the door and left, then opened it again, poking in her small black-haired head. "Thank you. For me, sir." And she left. The bed sways beneath me. I am so exhausted. Daylight filters in through the window. I open my eyes and move my limbs, feeling the strength given to me by last night's peaceful sleep. That sleep had washed me from the inside, and now my mind is terrifyingly clear. I got up, went to the filthy wash basin, washed my face, and stole a glance at the cracked mirror. There were 2 long gashes on my left cheek, but I'm a doctor. I can't be fooled easily. Who says these gashes are the marks of a werewolf's claws? The door opened behind me, and I saw the beloved silhouette of Ekaterina, carrying a tray with things that were supposedly edible. She placed it on the table behind me and turned toward me without raising her head. "This is your breakfast, sir." Her black hair hung down over her forehead, so I stood up, walked toward her, and with my fingers gently touched her small chin. She exclaimed awkwardly, "Please, no, sir, I'm not." I brushed away the lock of hair falling over her brow. That was what I was looking for. "And now, my angel, you're in a terrifying dilemma, and you're naive if you think a fallen lock of hair can hide your situation." I said in crisp English, pressing on every word, "Ekaterina, what's the reason for that bruise around your left eye?" "The wolf chase," she cried out in confusion as she pushed her hair back to cover her eye. "This, at the door. I hit it. It was at the door." I firmly grabbed her wrist and pulled the strand of hair away. "No, my little one, I was the one who struck you yesterday, when you were playing the role of the possessed, and the darkness and fear made me imagine you had unnatural strength. I don't understand, sir. And the wounds on my face, no animal claws could have caused them. They're the marks of a sharp, thin object that you were holding in your grip to make an impression." Tears filled her eyes, her whole being trembled, and, at that moment, the door opened and I saw her father, the tavern owner, enter. He gave us a suspicious look, then his eyes froze on Ekaterina's face, specifically on her left eye, then suddenly understanding dawned on him. He pointed at her and shouted something, then rushed out of the room repeating the same phrase over and over. One didn't need much intelligence to realize he was saying, "The possessed is my daughter. The possessed is my daughter." I turned to her and shouted, "Please, there's no time to explain. Run now!" But run. Those bastards are bloodthirsty, and the happiest moment in your father's life would be when he gets the chance to sacrifice you to prove his loyalty to the group. But they won't understand anything about your mental illness. They'll throw you to the ground and kill you with a silver knife. But go, find Father Antonescu at the church and ask for asylum. Confess everything to him. As for me, I'll try to fix the situation. I'll explain everything to them. Then the voices of the men downstairs rose, shouts of anger and rage. They were coming. The madman had summoned them. Quickly and without hesitation, I grabbed Ekaterina's hand and opened the window, despite the surrounding snow, and gently helped her slide down the thick layer of ice beneath the window, then signaled for her to run. She looked at me for a moment, hesitating, then took off running. The men entered the room, evil in their eyes, and said what meant, "Where is she?" in Romanian, so I pointed to the window. They rushed downstairs to chase her, of course, didn't miss the chance to search the room several times before believing my gesture, then gave me a suspicious look, and followed the men. I found myself alone in the room, perhaps in the entire tavern. I opened the door and looked around. There were 2 rooms on the same floor, both with closed doors. I walked slowly to the first door and tried the rusty handle. I found myself in a relatively clean little room. On the bed was an unfinished piece of canvas embroidery, and on the table in the middle of the room was a delicate vase with wilted flowers I couldn't name. Everything indicated that it was a woman's room, in particular. Her clothes were carelessly thrown over a wooden chair next to the bed, and then a poetry book written in Slavic letters, not even held in the correct way. My behavior was rude and intrusive, but I wanted to know, so I extended my cold, trembling hand to the mattress and lifted it. There was a large cloth bag carefully tied. I opened it and reached inside, feeling something like fur and objects like sharp plastic pieces. I emptied the bag onto the bed and found exactly what I expected. There, on the bed, was the head of the werewolf that attacked me last night, a masterfully crafted mask covered in fur. The eyes were red and glowing, but allowed the wearer to see through them, and the lower jaw, full of fangs, was movable. A true masterpiece. Next to the mask were 2 fur gloves equipped with claws, then something resembling a life vest from ships and airplanes. A device designed to enlarge the chest and shoulders when worn under clothing, and then, most importantly, a precise cutting tool, and a set of knives of various sizes that could tear an elephant apart, and finally a small photograph of a handsome, clean-shaven young man smiling foolishly. Now I understand everything. Ekaterina is Belasco, the werewolf who terrorized the village and frightened its men to death. She had prepared these sophisticated garments for herself, and began going out every full moon night in search of the unfortunate soul whom fate would throw into her grasp. And amidst all the fear and surprise, no one was ever ready to defend himself. No one ever tried, and in the dark she would slash him with the knives she carried, then flee and return to her original role, the delicate daughter of the tavern owner, occasionally telling fools like me the story of the wounded head werewolf. But why would she do that? Why? Dr. Rifat. That was Gustav's voice calling me. He had just woken up from his drunken exhaustion of the previous night, and had searched for me in the tavern but found no trace and no one to ask. "It's me, Gustav. I'm here." He came up to me on the upper floor where I stood in Ekaterina's room, and on the bed he found the werewolf fangs and cried out foolishly, Did you kill it? And skin it too?" "You idiot!" In a few quick words I explained everything to him. "And now what?" "First thing, we'll go to the church and confront her with what we know. Then we'll decide whether to keep this secret or make it public, depending on her explanation. She may be a murderer who deserves execution, or a schizophrenic who needs treatment, but in any case, we won't leave the matter to mob justice in this cursed village. She must be taken to Bucharest at any cost. At the church, we met Father Antonescu. I whispered to him, asking about the girl, and he told me she hadn't come. I swore to him that we wouldn't hurt her. He grew angry, insisting he wasn't lying. So we don't know where this unfortunate girl went, and whether the villagers managed to catch her before I could. We must search for her now. Then I remembered something. I pulled out the photo of the handsome young man that I had found in her room and brought it closer to the priest's glasses. "Do you know this young man, Father?" The priest didn't wait for Gustav to translate, as he brought his nose close to the photo and exclaimed, "Ah, Michailescu!" Then he said a few more words and made the sign of the cross. Guv said, "He says his name is Michailescu. That's obvious. I'm not a donkey after all." And that he was the mayor's son. He was a werewolf and attacked Stefano. But Stefano cut off his leg with an axe, and in the morning his story about how he lost his leg seemed fake and ridiculous, so they realized he was the werewolf and they killed him. And of course, this boy was in love with Ekaterina? A quick exchange passed between them, from which I understood that the answer was yes. So this is the story. A passionate love story between two sensitive young people. Then the girl loses her beloved due to a myth or a slanderous tale told by Stefano, and so she decides to take revenge and turn their moonlit nights into hell. As if she were saying, "Fine, you wanted a werewolf? Then here you go." And she began killing each month one of those responsible for her lover's death, and reserved a gruesome fate for Stefano, using me as the means. She knew he had a head injury, so she realized that choosing last night would lead to his death, just like her beloved died. But when things didn't go her way and Milo nearly lost his life, she put on the werewolf costume and waited to attack the first person to leave the tavern, and that person was me, unfortunately. What explanation did Michailescu give for losing his leg? He told them he lost consciousness while walking in the forest at night, and when he woke up, his leg was gone. And the wound was skillfully bandaged to stop the bleeding. Then he dragged himself home and collapsed onto his bed unconscious until they woke him in the morning to accuse him of being a werewolf. A strange and hard-to-believe story, but if we imagine, with some indulgence, that Stefano also loved Ekaterina, we could complete the story. He could have ambushed the boy in the woods, chopped off his leg with the axe, bandaged it, then ran to the village to announce his fabricated werewolf tale, thus eliminating his rival in a neat way through collective execution. But Ekaterina was there, and she decided to reward the village with a real werewolf. The last question I asked the priest before we ended our conversation was, how did the werewolf story start in the village? Gustav conveyed my question, and the priest shook his head in fatigue, smiled and began to speak. He says this happened centuries ago, back in the Middle Ages. The feudal family of Sharazan ruled the land with iron and fire, but a curse befell their bloodline. Their children were born as werewolves, and the illness begins with the darkening of urine and abdominal cramps. Then they turn into wolf-like monsters. Black urine and cramps, wolf-like monsters. This reminds me of something. Yes, that's it. I shouted to Gustav. That's how the story went. But the truth is they were suffering from a disease with scientific causes and a treatment. This disease was called werewolf syndrome by the ancients, but its scientific name is porphyria, type 5. This disease is caused by a disorder in the metabolism of iron in the body, which leads to numerous symptoms, including cramps and black urine. In rare cases, the fingernails elongate, fangs protrude, the skin wrinkles, eyebrows become thick, lips crack, and the eyes turn red. Then the patient avoids sunlight because they cannot tolerate it. In short, they turn into a human wolf, and over time the legend is born and leaves on in people's minds, and some use it to kill their wives or rivals in love. There have never been werewolves on this earth. Gustav cried out in distress. Wonderful! But could you shorten this scientific lecture until we save the girl? My God, I had completely forgotten her. I was overwhelmed by the thrill of finally finding an explanation to this mystery of history, and for a moment I thought I was a mix of Sherlock Holmes and Louis Pasteur. And I totally forgot that this was not the right time. Let's hurry, and thank Father Anne greatly for us. At the cemetery we found them, blood stained the white snow, and they were all standing in silence with their heads bowed. On the snow she was lying, her beautiful black hair spread around her, stained with blood and snow, and in her chest a long blade was sunk to its hilt, a silver blade, while her killers stood around her, panting with exhaustion. We were too late. Far too late. At her feet, one of them collapsed in tears, washing her with his sobs. He was bareheaded, with a long gash in his scalp. Stefano had lost his gentle beloved before his very eyes, after doing all the horrors he did to have her for himself. But I felt no pity for him. Gustav began to weep silently, and 2 warm tears ran down my cheeks, quickly turning into snowflakes beside my mouth. Without another word, Gustav took my arm and led me away from this horrifying scene. The legend of the werewolf has ended forever. But I am not proud at all of my part in it, not proud at all, and the sun sets quietly over the graves. The ending. At Bucharest airport I shook hands with Gustav and thanked him for everything, then asked him to keep writing to me. He touched the wound on my face and exclaimed with a smile, "If you turn into a werewolf next Thursday, don't forget to write me." I didn't smile and said gloomily, "Please don't bring that up again in your letters." "Oh, let's forget the past." I lit a cigarette, watched the passengers heading toward the passport hall, and asked, "Did you publish the story?" "No, why not? It's thrilling despite everything." The cultural office of the party. He looked around cautiously to make sure no one was listening, then added, "They said my story is imaginary and reactionary and doesn't serve the party's ideology, and it accuses the Southern Shepherds of backwardness. Maybe that's for the best." I shook his hand one last time and headed to the passport hall. He called out to me eagerly, "Try to come back to Romania soon. Wonderful things await you in Dr. Frankenstein's castle. There's no escape from that, but I'll learn Romanian first. Farewell, comrade. My regards to the Sphinx," and the plane took off. I thought I was returning to my peaceful, soft world, and I didn't know I was about to face a new nightmare in my small village. But that's another story. The end, by the grace of Allah.